As you mentioned, I talk about how rust is ubiquitous, and there are people behind the scenes working on either fighting rust or preventing it in the first place. Everywhere you look, but you never meet these people unless you really poke and prod and knock on doors. Mm-hmm. So where you and I both live, back in Colorado, we're lucky the water falls as snow and melts and it's really clean and doesn't need to be treated very heavily, but we add, I'm going to forget the name of the chemical now. We add a, what is it? Something hydroxide. It comes from a huge 50,000 pound tank, and it gets dumped in through what looks like a huge flour sifter. And we do that because it just so happens that the cleanest water is acidic, and that's the standard that water utilities need to abide by results in acidic water. And we can't pump acidic stuff through our precious infrastructure, our pipes underground, so we make it a little bit basic. And when people talk about water being hard, really they're complaining about it being basic, which we do so that it doesn't rust all the pipelines everywhere. And as water gets treated again and again and again farther from the Rockies, like down in New Orleans, it's got a lot of stuff in it, which is why shower heads clog up faster there than they do where I live in Colorado. But it's not because they're trying to make it taste good. It's not because they're trying to clog up our shower heads. They're doing it because the stuff under the roads, the big water mains, cannot rust. It would be a nightmare if they had to replace those things every 5 years or 10 years.
And you mentioned something about exploding manhole covers. That happens sometimes.
Yeah, it's amazing. Rust is, I didn't write a book about the exceptional things rust has done, but rust has done some, I mean, it's opened up crypts. It's blown manhole covers up. It's blown water heaters through people's roofs, like from the basement up through the floor and through the roof up into the sky. It's knocked down bridges, obviously. It's taken planes out of the sky. It's killed people. It's almost killed a lot more people. But you were also getting at what we do to keep, I brought a can with me, because what better thing to have a prop. This stuff's only like as thick as a piece of paper.
The aluminum.
The aluminum is only as thick as a piece of paper, and we take it for granted that you can put something like pomegranate juice in a can and not have it corrode through that stuff. And it's the same with a paper cup. It's not a paper cup, it's a paper cup lined with wax or plastic. And so in the case of the can, and I wrote a long chapter about this, we test how corrosive the stuff inside is going to be, and that determines how thick the layer of plastic inside the can has to be.
Yeah, the way you compare it to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and thinking about the history of chemicals and pollutants and what we're ingesting, for me, is really powerful. And it was eye-opening about just how much you could be ingesting on a daily basis if you have a can of soup, if you have a can of soda, a can of beer. You could be getting a lot of, specifically BPA.
Right, and a lot is, it's hard to call it a lot. It's
right.
Biochemically, perhaps over a certain threshold we weren't ever meant to take in, but it's a tiny amount. I mean, it's probably in the order of a couple parts per billion at most. And the industry, it's not just one can maker, it's all can makers, except for very few who don't use the coatings that have mostly BPA in them. And the FDA regulates how much of this stuff can leach out of the coating and into the product inside and then be taken in by us.
But you said it's maybe not as large a threshold as it should be.
Right, so the FDA's threshold is half a part per billion. Below that threshold, companies that test this stuff don't have to look at mutagenicity or carcinogenicity or do the multi-generational feeding studies on rats. Unfortunately, I talked to, I heard from one scientist who said that threshold is off by 1 to 8 orders of magnitude, which means that we're not talking parts per billion, we're talking parts per quadrillion, which is beyond the analytical capabilities of pretty much any lab out there. And I talked to another guy who's got some patents on the coatings in these cans, and he said he's seen what can go wrong, he knows what's in them, and he knows, he's concerned. He said he's so concerned that he won't drink out of a can, he won't let cans in his house. And he works for the Coatings Research Institute.
And was he the one who said he thought it should be labeled that pregnant women should not drink out of a can?
So I brought this up. I said, well, what can we do to change that? What about the warning label which says, this doesn't have a warning label because it's just a soda. He said if the Surgeon General suggested that we change it from women should not drink alcoholic beverages during pregnancy to women should not drink canned beverages, he'd be in favor of that. So Who thought that rust would take me there, but it did.